Emeritus Professor Jacquie Rand is going to be talking about managing cats humanely and scientifically to reduce cats, wildlife predation and costs. And it's also, there's a little announcement to our international speakers as well. There's a meeting outside. It was meant to be at 2:15, but our time's changed, so it might be a good time to go now, just briefly. So if you're an international speaker, that means if you're a speaker from another country, then go outside to the registration desk. What can I say? Yes. Good one, Anne. All right. Without further ado, Emeritus Professor Jacquie Rand.
Thank you. Just waiting for my presentation to come up. Good. I think I click a button here. Oops. Good. So I'm talking to you about managing cats scientifically and humanely to decrease cats, and if you're a council employee, decrease your costs as well. And I'd like to acknowledge both the Australian Pet Welfare Foundation and the University of Queensland as being collaborators in a lot of this data. So how big is the problem? So for a city of 1 million residents, and if you live in Brisbane, in Melbourne or Sydney, just multiply all these figures by about 4. Sorry. Based on Ray Morgan research, there's about 150,000 owned cats in a city of 1 million, about 50 to 65,000 stray cats. How many enter shelters and pounds? We've done Diana Chu, and she's going to be presenting tomorrow. We've looked at per state, and it's about 5 to 10 cats per 1,000 residents, depending on the state, enter shelters and pounds. And if you look at the number that are stray compared to owner surrendered using pound data and RSPCA data, most pounds data, most of their cats are stray, and it's about 50-50 for RSPCA. So 3,000 to 6,000 stray cats annually would enter the shelters and pounds, and about 2,400 owned cats. Based on Diana Chu's data from across Australia, it was about 56% were killed. In the Brisbane City Council area, if you add in the 1,000 in their feral cat program, it's about 35%. So they're doing better than average. And if you look at all the costs to take in a cat, care for it, hold it for the minimum holding period, and then either euthanize it or try and find a home for it, it averages out probably about $500 a cat, although a lot of councils are not paying this much. But in the end, it costs the community welfare agencies about that amount. So for a city of 1 million, welfare agencies and the council together are going to be spending between about $2.5 million to $5 million a year managing cats. Stray cats are what I'm going to talk about, and where are they coming from? Well, you know, we've heard they're wandering owned cats. There's also lost owned cats, abandoned cats where people move house and leave the cat. But in fact, semi-owned cats are by far the biggest group in this stray cat population in urban areas. And based on the data, we analysed the data from 191,000 cats coming into RSPCA between 2006 and 2010, and Corrine Albertson did some work, and that's been presented. Most are socialised to people that are coming into RSPCA shelters. And remember, they do quite a bit of council work as well. And only 10% on average were classed as feral based on behaviour. And I've just been looking at some recent data, and the percentage that's classed as feral is dropping over time. I don't think it's because we're getting less socialised cats, but we've got more time and ability to deal with those that have got poorer socialisation or a shire. So I'd just like to talk a little bit about the semi-owned cats, because they are contributing a lot to our intake, into our pounds particularly, about 50% into our shelters. They contribute a lot to cat-related complaints as well, and that's what council animal control officers deal with. So in a survey that Sarah Zito did for her PhD, we asked people surrendering a stray cat to the RSPCA, and 56% had been providing care for more than a month. And they brought it to the shelter because they said it wasn't their cat, they cared for it, and they thought it was better off in the shelter. This was a study by Pauline Bennett's group in Victoria, and they surveyed Victorian households. 22% said they were feeding a cat they didn't perceive was their own, and it wasn't the neighbours. And 33% owned a cat. Again, research by Sarah Zito, it was an online questionnaire. 9% of respondents fed a cat daily they didn't perceive they owned. Now, some of those cats are microchipped, some of them are desexed, but they don't perceive ownership. And if you calculate it out and knowing that internet surveys are mostly females and males aren't represented, it's probably about 1 in 15 to 20 people in our cities feed cats daily that they don't, and it's often more than one cat, that they don't perceive they own. So what are we going to do? Well, we can keep doing what we're doing. We can accept strays from the public and provide traps for those people that are concerned about cats and want to get them off their property or where they are. And we've calculated, as I mentioned this morning, we're killing about 5% of the urban stray cat population annually. It's been shown that it stimulates reproduction, increases survival of juveniles, ensuring a new crop of kittens and cats to be harvested several months later, if not next year. And in fact, a hallmark study from Tasmania, where they really mirrored what rangers would be going, or national park rangers would be going into forests, going in periodically, trapping cats and killing them. And they removed 30% of the cat population in two treatment areas, and they had 2 treatment areas where they didn't do any trapping. And it increased cat numbers in the areas they trapped and killed by 2 to 3 times, and it happened quickly. And that was largely immigration into the area of less dominant animals after they'd removed the more dominant ones, and you get increased survival of the juveniles. So essentially what we're doing at the moment, as I mentioned this morning, is equivalent to sustainably farming cats. And Einstein, his famous quote about insanity's doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting cat numbers to decrease. So we can kill them, and as I mentioned, Miller, who did this very sophisticated modelling paper, said you need to kill 30 to 50% every 6 months for at least 10 years to effectively control and not eliminate cats in open populations. So in fact, we need to kill at least 15 times more cats than we're killing currently in our shelters and pounds. But is the community going to support it? They'll sabotage it. They certainly won't help in a large majority to help the council trap. So the councils has to go out there, and to trap the whole colony is going to take them at least 4 to 6 nights per cat to get all those last stragglers. It's going to cost them heaps of money. The Brisbane City Council spends $250,000 with a target of 1,000 cats a year. And so that's $250 per cat for a trapper and their car and their on costs. And that's without any minimum holding period. And of course, if we want to trap 30 to 50% every 6 months in our urban areas, we're going to get a lot more complaints coming to government. And again, who's going to pay for it? In the Brisbane City Council, I calculated that it's going to cost them $24 million in the first year. And in fact, if you want to remove cats from Australia, it's going to cost you, and you can't remove cats, but if you really want to get a decrease in number, we have to spend 20 to 30% of our GDP every year for the next 10 years. So let's forget about hospitals, schools, and all of those things, and let's go for a pile of dead cats. Well, we can put feeding bans, and Brisbane City Council is enacting some of those. But who's going to police it? Just remember, there's 60,000 people in Brisbane feeding cats daily, and they're going to have to put on a hell of a lot of officers to police it. And in fact, there's been no city in the world where a feeding ban succeeded in eliminating cats, because you just can't ban people from caring. And we just don't have enough officers. And is that the best use of their time, to be catching predominantly women feeding cats around sunrise and sunset? And anyway, I won't go into it, I better not. We can do trap, neuter and return, where we desex them, adopt them if we can, and return those that are healthy. And we vaccinate them, we worm them, we flea control them, we microchip, and we ear tip them. And you can see, if you didn't know what ear tipping is, I can use the pointer here. See this cat here? And I do recommend that for their safety. So does it work? Because what we hear with these major organisations that don't support it is that it doesn't work. So the first thing to realise is, for it to work, it has to be targeted. You can't use a shotgun approach. And this is Tampa, Florida, and they decided to target the postcode here that had the highest cat intake into the pound. Had a population, human population of 44,000 people, and they desexed about 3,000 cats over a 2-year period. They paid a full-time trapper who was supported by volunteers. They did a street-by-street approach. They used a car that was wrapped, it had signs on it, trap neuter works, and there were free desexing signs. And they went from street to street, putting these signs up, putting flyers in people's post boxes, free desexing. And so on the left, you can see, yes it is your left, the postcode where they targeted, and the other graph on the other side is the rest of that Tampa City. And you can see the intake here is 600, close to 700 cats, and about 1,600 cats, 16,000 cats in the rest of the city. And over a period of 2009 to 2013, the intake in the area where they did trap, neuter and return dropped by 47%, and the intake in the control areas dropped by 17%. The classic area is Gainsville, Florida, and that's where Julie Levy's study was done, and she's a great scientist. And so in the target area, again, they picked a postcode that was overrepresented by intake into the shelter, and they did TNR of just over 2,000 cats in a 2-year period. They adopted sociable cats and kittens, and so they were desexing 60 cats per 1,000 head of people. And that represented about 54% of the cat population. Now, the rest of the area of Gainesville, they had low-level trap, neuter and return programs going that were desexing about 8 cats per 1,000 residents. And in this graph here, you can see, whoops, no, that's not what I want. Here, can you see my pointer? Is that, no, it doesn't show up, does it? Okay. Well, I can't point on both slides, unfortunately. Does this work at all? Okay, you just have to look at the dotted line. I can't see how this, oh, press the red one. If you look at so this is intake per 1,000 residents on this axis here, the vertical axis here, and this dotted line is the number of desexings that were happening. And you can see here in this baseline year how rapidly they increased. The dark black line is intake into the shelter, and the grey line is euthanasia. And you can see how quickly, and they desexed in this year 1 and year 2, so over a 2-year period, how quickly intake and euthanasia dropped with the number being desexed. And you can see here, with the, intake was reduced by 33%, and it was 3.5 times higher in the non-target area. Remember, there's still desexing 8 cats per 1,000 residents in this area. And euthanasia was 17 times higher in the non-target area. So pretty impressive figures, and it happens quickly. And this one I quite like because it's similar to an area that we want to do a trial research project in Australia. So the Humane Society partnered with the Council Pound, and they introduced TNR to replace euthanasia as the standard policy for healthy, unowned, poorly socialised cats. And the population was 18,000. They desexed 580 cats over just a 1-year period. The animal control officers trapped half the cats, the rest were by residents. And the blue line shows, or the purple line shows why they started it, because the blue line is intake and the red line, or the red bars are euthanasia, and they were just steadily increasing over time. And they said, enough is enough. So the blue line is intake beforehand, and this is where they desexed the cats, and you can see that they got a 34% drop in intake and a 51% drop in euthanasia the next year. It happens fast if you do really good targeted TNR. And this is one of her early studies where they did TNR. Whoa. TNR on the Gainsville, Florida campus. And this just keeps on changing. And just have a look at the shape of that graph, and then have a look at the shape of this next one, because we keep hearing in Australia there's no evidence that it works. And Professor Helen Swarbrick's here, and this was a hallmark study from the University of New South Wales campus. And cat-related complaints were in the top 3 complaints coming to properties and facilities, along with parking complaints. So they decided to do something about it and hired a pest control company. And the pest control company came in. They reduced the cat, they removed 13 cats, charged the university, I think it's rumoured, $40,000 over 4 months. But now complaints have increased because staff are complaining that the cats are being trapped by a pest control company, and they started to go down to the pound and retrieve some of these cats. And the university could see this was a very good business model for the pest control company, and they could be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars every year at the university for not a lot of gain. And so some of the staff, dedicated staff, and Professor Helen Swarbrick was one of them, approached the university and convinced them to try trap, neuter and return. And universities are very conscious of money, and they thought that it might save them some money, I think. I'm not sure they were so concerned about welfare. And they actually paid for the desexing. And you can see how that line's dropped, very similar to what happened on the University of Florida. Last year, when they reported to the university executive, they had 18 mostly elderly cats. I understand there's now 15 elderly cats there. The university is very happy. It doesn't cost them money, and there's no complaints. I presented this morning, which has now been published, where we asked people who are doing trap, neuter and return in Australia, and they described the colonies. It was an online survey. Median colony size when they started was 12. Current number of cats was 7. The reporting time was 2 years. They adopted 3 kittens and cats per colony. And the initial total number of cats they reported on was 515, and at the time they reported, which again it was about 2.5 years in this analysis, was 344 cats. And you have to really kill about 50% of the population every 6 months to get that sort of decrease from culling over a 2-year period. And they largely paid for it rather than government. They fed them, they vaccinated, they microchipped them. But the important thing to realise, if TNR is going to work, it has to be targeted. And this is a slide from Brian Cortis, who's a really smart and experienced guy. He's now in Hawaii. And he says that if you've got 100 cats in 3 postcodes and you've only got money for 20 spay-neuters, do you just let people bring the cats in and offer free spay-neuters for colonies, colony cats? And if you look at that diagram there, you can imagine that the cats that are not desexed in those colonies where you're just doing a scattergun approach, they can easily reproduce to cover the decrease in kittens being produced by the ones that are desexed. Or you can spend your money and you can target the whole colony. But if there's lots of colonies around, unless you really intensively manage those existing colonies and make sure you catch every immigrant cat, that's not the most effective use of your money. And you're better to start off in one postcode that is a problem. They're often lower socioeconomic areas, you know, government housing, factories, that sort of thing, and target that whole postcode and then move out from there. Because if you target the area around Ralph's, where Ralph's Cafe diners are, but you've got all the houses round about, they will be repopulating fairly quickly. So you have to move, you have to spread out from there and deal with the problem areas. But of course, in Australia, there's lots of objections to TNR. It's a grey area of legality because you could, so there's 2 areas of law that generally cover it. It's one about welfare laws and that it could be construed as abandonment. I think you could fight that pretty well in court, given they're fed every day, they're microchipped, vaccinated, etc. But the other issue is they are regarded as pest species, and it does depend on the state. And in Queensland, cats are only owned or feral. So every stray cat's feral, it's subject to the legislation, and it depends on the council how stringently they interpret that. But in Queensland, they are prosecuting people because you're not allowed to feed them, you're not allowed to remove them for adoption, and you're not allowed to release them. And they have actually prosecuted people who have admitted to or pleaded guilty to removing kittens for adoption. As I mentioned, the AVA policy doesn't support it. The official RSPCA policy doesn't support it, but I think that will change. And the AVA document says one of the reasons they don't support it is it's not been shown to be effective under Australian conditions. The other concern that people raise is, well, what about that cat that you put back? It might get hit by a car sometime in the future and there's no one there to help it. Well, we're not helping the ones that are out there now, so, and the fact that they're desexed, they will roam less. But there's been quite a bit of work done on this. In North America, they've shown that less than 1% of free-living cats that are trapped in these programs are too unhealthy to return. And they've shown that the incidence of infectious disease in free-living cats is similar or less than in pet cats, and that's one of the concerns. These cats will transmit disease to owned cats. Well, the incidence is in the same or less in the owned cat population, or of disease is actually the same or more in the owned cat population. And generally, it's been shown that neutering and return to sites associated with an improvement in body condition, health and longevity, and at least no deterioration. And this was work that I mentioned this morning by Anya Dale, and she found that the majority of neutered free-living cats in managed colonies or unmanaged colonies are healthy, and that cats in managed colonies were not significantly different from owned cats. And cats in unmanaged colonies were leaner than pet cats or managed colony cats, but only 4% were emaciated compared to 2% of owned cats. And just remember, about 60% of owned cats are overweight or obese. So why are we killing them? Why don't we return them? We've heard a lot in the last couple of days that cats are more likely to disappear from a household than dogs. 66% of lost cats are found because they return home. Only 7% of lost cats are found via a call or visit to a shelter. And cats are 13 times more likely to return by non-shelter than shelter means. And our research has shown that only 4.5% of cats are reclaimed from shelters and pounds in Australia. And the study I presented this morning, that lost cats, half of them were actually found within 50 metres of where they lived, and 75% within 500 metres. But then there's the elephant in the room, the wildlife. What if that cat that's released will kill a bird? Well, you know, killing less wildlife requires that we have less cats out there. So we can have less cats if we either kill approximately 40% every 6 months in a city of 1 million, spend $24 million in the first year, or we can do desex, adopt and return home. So which way do you want to go to protect wildlife? But in fact, there's no study in urban Australia that demonstrates a negative effect of cats on native wildlife populations. And a Perth study investigated species diversity across 3 bushland sites. And for more than 10 years in each one of those sites, the cats either were totally banned, it was ecologically friendly, you couldn't have a cat, or in another postcode, they required the cats to be in overnight and to wear a bell. And the other postcode, you could do with what you liked with the cat. And what did they find? The numbers of the most abundant medium-sized mammals were similar across all sites, and they were brushtail possums and southern brown bandicoots. And there was a little small hoppy thing, an antechinus, and those are really susceptible to cat predation. Cats are very potent at that's what they're most adapted to, killing little hoppy things. And they found they were mostly found at the site where you could do what you liked with your cat. But the vegetation was a bit denser there, and they concluded that it was not cats, that it was density of vegetation. Another one in Sydney bushland that looked at predation of birds and nests. And so this was metropolitan bushland, and they actually put in artificial bird's nest, and they must have looked pretty real because they were all attacked by other avian predators. 10 of them were attacked by black rats. Ringtail possums and antechinus attacked a few. No nests were attacked by cats. And even better, there was less nest predation the more cats there were. And they concluded that it was probably the cats were controlling the black rats. And this study, where we're asking owners of dogs and cats what they've observed their pet to catch over a 6-month period, and surprise, surprise, what do cats catch? What we brought them to Australia for originally, to kill mice, followed by rats, followed by small lizards and common birds, which is consistent with other studies. And that's consistent with Macquarie Island, where cats had a positive effect because they were controlling the rabbit population. And once they took the cats out, the rabbit population exploded, and it caused more severe damage to the environment. And they had to go and take out the rabbits as well. And bless their heart, the Brisbane City Council thought that they would convince taxpayers how well they were spending their $250,000 catching 1,000 feral cats where people were feeding them. And so they sent them off for stomach contents, and this was in their newsletter, that they said that unfortunately the results from the examination of the stomach contents of feral cats provided little insight into the impact of cats on native wildlife. Only prey species consumed was the black rat. Bugger. And what people don't realise is that if you look at data on banding studies of birds, the average lifespan of most Australian birds is between 2 and 4 years. Some of the parrots live longer, the fairy penguins live longer, but most die. And, you know, it's like the average lifespan of humans is about 80 years. And we don't live to 160 because we die of cancer and heart disease and all sorts of other things. Birds die of the same things, but much earlier, and it's a different proportion of things that kill them. But maths was never my strong point, so if I use 5 years that they live for on average, it means 20% are dying every year. It's just the turnover. And it keeps the breeding stock healthy and uses the best genes, and it's part of survival of the fittest. And there's 2 studies, one from France and one from the UK, which showed that birds that were killed by cats were significantly less healthy than birds killed by killed by cars and flying into windows. And they concluded that cats are opportunist hunters and tend to remove the sick, the old, the fallen out of the nest. And in fact, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds in the UK came out with this statement and said, despite the large numbers of birds killed, there's no scientific evidence that predation by cats in gardens is having any impact on bird populations UK-wide. It's likely that most of the birds killed by cats would have died anyway from other causes before the next breeding season. So cats are unlikely to have a major impact on populations. So, will the community support trap neuter and return? So, in this study where we're asking people about what their dog and cat killed, we also asked them some other questions. So it was a survey of 1,239 respondents. 70% said cats had a negative effect on they thought cats had a negative effect on wildlife in their area, compared to 24% who said they thought dogs had a negative effect on wildlife in their area. If you talk to conservationists, they'll say that dogs are equally, if not more, devastating on wildlife in urban areas. And I certainly know that my dogs have more effect on wildlife that comes into our backyard than our 2 cats do. So then we said to them, overseas programs exist where stray suburban cats are captured, desexed, then returned to where they're captured. These programs have been shown to reduce the number of complaints about these cats and to reduce the numbers of stray cats and kittens put to sleep in shelters. Would you support a trial project like this in a specified area near you? 82% said yes. So although they're concerned about their impact on wildlife, and I would guess that everyone in this room cares for wildlife as well, but you don't want cats killed to protect wildlife, not when there's another way. And in Montana, they showed that with trap, neuter and return, there was a 36% decline in cat intake, an 87% decline in euthanasia, an 84% decline in cat-related complaints. And that's interesting because that really drops off quickly. Texas, a 90% decline in cat-related complaints with TNR. Kentucky, a 51% decline in the cat target area, of intake and a 20% decline in the entire service area. So TNR decreases intake, it decreases euthanasia, intake costs councils money, and in Australia we showed a 31% decline in colony size over 2.2 years. So my recommendation is that we change legislation, that we define feral cats as cats that have get no support from humans for food or shelter, and in a practical way of defining them, they're going to be cats that are further than 3 to 5 kilometres from the nearest human habitation. And that we remove cats that stray from the feral pest legislation, because if we keep them under that feral pest legislation, we are never going to be able to manage them effectively and decrease their numbers. So, and then we need to also add into the legislation that TNR is allowed in urban areas. And if you actually look at the fine print, so when I looked at the fine print of the Queensland Land and Stock Movement Act and the Biosecurity Queensland, they actually say that you can release cats, and you obviously have to feed them to catch them, if they're part of a biological control program. And TNR is biological control, but we need it spelled out much more clearly in the legislation. And I think that best practice guidelines need to be developed. And I'll say this once and I might say it again: complaints kill cats. Complaints kill cats. So you need to do TNR really well to avoid complaints, because that's when animal control officers will move in. And I would suggest that we do have a registry of colonies that is accessible by public authorities, so they know where they are, but it's held by an organisation like the RSPCA, so freedom from information can't be used to find the location of the colonies and post those on internet. That the carer responsible is registered and provides their primary and secondary contact details, so if this is a problem with the cats, they can be contacted quickly. The location and address site to protect those cats so that we know that they're under TNR. And that there's annual reporting of cat numbers to know where there's issues. And I would encourage managed colonies, although if identified carers aren't available, and particularly for shelter, neuter and return, where you're putting individual cats back, you can assume they do have a carer. Adoptable kittens and cats are removed initially to get a rapid reduction in colony size. 100% of the cats are desexed within 6 months, ideally within a week, and healthy cats that can't be adopted are returned to location. Cats are vaccinated and provided with parasite control at desexing, minor health treatment provided if indicated. They're microchipped, ear-tipped, and what's really important is that you monitor those colonies so that immigrant cats that come in, and they will come in, are captured and desexed quickly, or they're adopted out. It's best if food is placed in containers away from public view. You get less complaints. Uneaten food should be removed after 30 minutes because that helps to stop vermin. And if you're feeding those cats learn really fast to come and eat food fast. And you see that as a clinician involved in obesity research, I know that once the cats get down, and they're on a weight loss, they can stuff that food in, a few minutes. Cats learn really, really quickly, and most research cats are fed once a day, and if you try and keep them lean, which they don't like, they just scoff the food. So if you've got them all coming for that feeding time for the 30 minutes, you can monitor immigrant cats, you can monitor cats that are sick and then do something about them, and it stops vermin coming and complaints. Again, complaints kill cats. Whether appropriate shelter provided and hidden from view. And this is important. It's listening to people who do have complaints. But I guess education material distributed so people do understand what you're doing, but also best practice in dispute resolution, because you have to recognise people do have a right not to have cats on their property, and if you don't respect that, then the complaints will continue. But if you work with them, and I haven't been involved personally with these cat deterrent devices, but I'm in contact with a number of groups in North America that are doing very extensive TNR. They say the best cat deterrents are these multi-frequency that are motion detected, they're solar powered. If someone doesn't want a cat in their garden, you put one in the front garden, one in the back garden. You can have one in a flower pot that you move around. If the people own a cat and that's inside, then you face them away from the house, but they haven't had any complaints about them. They will keep other wildlife away. You can't have not cats, but have possums running across the ground. So but they say that they're extremely effective. They also have a strobe light that goes on as well. So at least people and providing them as a trial rental, but at least it gives people a feeling of control. They may not want it, but well, they want the control, but they may not want a cat deterrent device. But at least you're offering something and you're listening. So what are our alternatives? Well, we can keep doing what we're doing, farming cats and harvesting kittens. We can increase the killing by 15 times or more. We can ban feeding. We can wave a magic wand. Or we can desex them, adopt them and return them home, which will decrease population size, decrease shelter and pound intake, decrease euthanasia, cat-related complaints, and impact on staff. Now, I keep hearing, yes, but that cat might kill a bird. And what we need to be saying is without community cat programs, someone has to kill the cats and kittens. And the people that are sitting in the room here are often the people that have to kill the cats and kittens. And it's well known now, there's a psychological cost to that. This is Australian research. 50% of workers directly involved with euthanasia develop post-traumatic stress. Depression, substance abuse, high blood pressure, sleeplessness, and suicide are all increased with that condition. And the staff turnover rate in shelters is proportional to the euthanasia rate. So when I hear about, well, it might kill a bird, well, killing might kill a person. So someone has to kill them. Killing healthy animals damages people's lives, and in some cases, killing animals kills people. And in fact, the suicide rate now for the animal rescue sector, which is what they call this sector in North America, has reached #1 spot along with policemen and firemen. And Kate Hurley gave me this quote that she'd heard recently. Every day while I was cleaning cat cages, the euthanasia team would come through and euthanise the day's cats and pile them on a cart and wheel the pile out to the cooler. Every day when I saw that, I went out to the parking lot and threw up. But after the community cat program began, now we just tear up the euthanasia list and all the cats go to surgery. It's time. It's time. And I'd like to show you a video now, and I'm not sure how I get that up. It's a video that was made by Target Zero, Humane Society USA, and the Million Cat Challenge. And it's not a professionally made video, and it's council staff. So they call them counties, and they're talking about trap, neuter and return, and they're talking about diversion programs. Diversion programs are shelter, neuter and return, where those cats that come in that you know, they're stray cats, you know you're not going to be able to adopt them out, and you desex them and put them straight back to where they were found.
And it was still kind of hard, even after we opened up the whole shelter, because cats have always been a lot in this area. So it's always had rooms full, especially in the summer. And I believe I was told at first that I might have 15 cats, and I think I've never laughed so hard because I did not believe that that would ever happen.
Been a lifesaver, not only for the animals. What I want to convey is it's a lifesaver for us. I get emotional when I think about it because it's made such a difference in our lives.
Especially personally, I feel like there's been a huge weight lifted. People should get on board. I think every county, every state should be on board because it's amazing what it's done. And thank you so much from the bottom of my heart and all of my cats' hearts here for everything you've done.
In 2011, I had a seasoned vet tech walk into my office in tears. She had euthanized 42 kittens, and she could not face another day, another kitten season. Luckily, we were able to sit down as a team. I couldn't help but feel like I had failed them in some way. 85% of our kittens are coming from outdoor sources. So why weren't we going after and doing some type of population control in the community? Thus, community cat diversion and TNR are the answer. See, I encourage you, please just do it. I promise the ceiling won't fall on your head. We were extremely worried about our community backlash because of changes in the services we were providing. But honestly, our animal control officers were already out there trapping, and euthanasia doesn't work. So we started retraining, rethinking about how we were doing things. Our animal control officers became active in TNR as a solution for our community cat complaints, and it works. One location we had been going to for 18 years, the gentleman complained that we had removed 46 cats from his property. Why all of a sudden a change? Hello, we've been coming there all these years and removed 46 cats, and we still don't have an answer. So we went to that location. Our officers actively engaged a caretaker in the area, TNR'd the location. It took care of nuisance cat complaints, and we haven't had any complaints in that area. The complainant is extremely happy with the results. The redirection of our efforts then allowed us to free up our shelter staff to take care of the animals in the facility, and it's working. We went from a 25% live release rate to 94% last month. Rates are going down in all of the shelters. One particular shelter that was a little resistant went from 48% to 83% in a matter of months. So it doesn't take years. It can be done in months. So I'm encouraging you, just do it. That was a piece of advice that was given to me, and I was extremely, apprehensive. Because that wasn't the way I was taught to do things. The truth of the matter is that after removing tens of thousands of cats from this community over the last decade, it hasn't worked. It didn't work until we instituted TNR and community cat diversion. So I encourage you, just do it.
Since the start of the TNR program, we've actually decreased 70% in how many litters we've taken in. This has allowed us to really focus on cats that are from houses and owner surrenders and cats that need to go to a home versus cats that are used to living outside and can fend for themselves. The open cages for the winter has been something that we've never seen before. It's been eye-opening just how much the TNR program was needed in our area.
Last year, before our TNR program was in full swing, we had between 150 and 170 cats in the building at any one time. And we were euthanizing lots of cats because we were holding them and then they were getting sick and then we could not adopt them out. Since our TNR program has taken hold, we have very few cats and cat adoptions. We used to have 5 different rooms to hold cats, and now we only have 2. And there was some fear that by reducing kennel space, we were going to have a higher euthanasia rate for our cats. And that has been the exact opposite. We are almost no kill for cats now, reaching very close to a 90% live release rate. And the cats in our care are getting more attention that they need. There's a shortage of adoptable cats right now in the city of El Paso. Decreasing the population of our cats in the building has significantly decreased our staff's stress load, and it's allowed us to focus more on the dog population and give them the care that they need. So not only are we saving more cats, and our live release rate is great for the cats, but our live release rate is going up for the dogs as well.
Visited us and said, would you like to do a community cats project? And they said some things that seemed a little crazy at the time. Like they told us that our cat admission rates could drop by as much as 20%. They said we'd hit no kill for cats, and they showed us this video of another shelter that had empty cat kennels in the middle of kitten season. And it all seemed kind of crazy, but we really wanted to try it, and we did, and it has all come true. Our cat admission rates have dropped by nearly 30%, from 8,000 cats to about 5,000. Our cat save rate went from about 44% to nearly 90%. And then if you look behind me, we have empty kennels here and are facing a little bit of a cat and kitten shortage. It changed our shelter in ways we never expected and has just helped us save thousands of lives.
And we just wanted to let you see and know how well the community cat program has been working for us. Since 2015, we have not had to put down one adult cat or any cat really for space of any kind. So the community cat program can make a major difference in your program, and I hope that you get the same results that we've gotten with our community cat program.
This is what community cat diversion looks like.
Go to the Australian Pet Welfare Foundation, and there's one of the tabs there on the homepage is 9 ways to save lives. The last tab is community cat programs. There's a whole lot of resources there. There's books and things, and that video is there too if you want to show it to someone.
Actually, if you want to stay up here.
Oh, might as well.
Yeah, so if I can invite all of our speakers from this session, it's going to get a little cozy on the stage. But fortunately, through the generosity of some shorter speakers, we have longer question time. Da, da, da. Look, quick reminder while our speakers are taking their seats, there are 3 shelter med books left at the special summit price available through the G2Z desk. So if you are after one of those at the special summit price, please just give them your details and they'll order one for you. Okay, so if we want to have questions again, if I could ask you to stand at the mic, or if you don't want to, somehow pass me a note in a subtle way. Yes, we have a question.
I do. I'm Amanda from Sharpay Rescue. We're incorporated in Victoria and have been since 2008. We'd love to get on board with the vets. Respect to you all. However, we do a triennial at 10 weeks. We desex our males at 10 weeks. We desex our females at 12 weeks. We will not alter that because between 8 and 20 weeks, these dogs are bonding to us. We don't want that. We want them to bond to the community. Sharpay have enough problems as it is without bonding elsewhere. So we have 5 pups in care at the moment who are 6, 7 weeks. Who do we need to speak to at the unis to have you guys monitor them for their lives so that you have the data to present back to the vets for this prepubescent desexing that we need in rescue or shelters. I wouldn't give my mother an undersexed dog. I'm not going to give it to anyone else.
Look, it's going to take time, and vet schools are losing a lot of money. Like, UQ was losing about $5 million a year. And to train students for another week, which they have to be quick enough to do early age desexing, so they have to have good competent surgery skills and then build on it, takes another week of training. And I honestly think that welfare agencies need to be the instigator of change and approaching universities for this experience. It is changing, and what universities are realising is that they graduate students with much better skills than I did. And I think once we get, like, we've got 700 students now graduating every year approximately in Australia. Once they go out to vet practices and they say, oh yeah, I can do it. But if you don't graduate with hands-on skills and you have a boss who says, no, we don't do it here, then it's really hard to do it. I think it's changing. I'm not sure whether the National Desexing Network has a list of veterinarians who will do early age desexing, but to get the data we need, they've got to be big studies, and I do think that welfare agencies, they've got the data on the animals they desexed, but it costs a lot of money to find those animals and survey them. Those two big studies done by Spain with 1,600 animals and 1,200 animals with follow-up periods. It needs to be done, but it's a big job.
I'm sure the rescue orgs in this room and around Australia would back me and say, we'll all offer what we've got. I'm prepared to take these dogs to our vet. I mean, we have vets in each state. I'll have them desexed there. They're going to be desexed anyway. I'll pay for it. I'll get it done. All I'm asking is, who do I need to speak to have this data followed through? We can provide the names of the people that we adopt them to. We can say, all right, you're going to adopt these dogs. They are going to be followed by the Veterinary Association. It's very important. We need to prove that in rescue and shelters, we need to desex these animals at a young age. And by the way, we have done quite a few. I've had one incontinence issue. It's the only issue I've ever had. And she actually was the vet's dog. So she wasn't an issue at all.
Yeah, so certainly, as Jackie was saying, longitudinal studies are quite expensive. That's why they don't happen more often. We would love for them to happen more often. I do think that, that the time is now. I guess from our perspective, if there's researchers out there who want to come on board, definitely. But it's got to be a collaborative approach. I don't think welfare agencies, as we stand at the moment, have the resources to conduct these studies ourselves, but we do have the information. So therefore, if there's research units out there at Australian universities, then that's certainly something we can do. And yeah, I think it has to be done. We need that data.
So how do we get in touch with these people?
Well, we need to be contacting the companion animal scientists, the veterinary scientists that are based at each uni. Probably a good place to start would be your vet schools. See anyone who does that sort of research. There would be people out there, but someone's pretty much got to jump on board, claim it as their own. This is a many year, many student sort of project that we're talking about.
Is there a website or something we could go to?
Can I say something? Yeah. Sorry, I know I'm chair it, whatever. So I work at Sydney University, and one of the things that happens, so with the Amanda's Honours Project, Kim's just stepped on a chicken. With Amanda's Honours Project, the RSPCA approached us and said, we've got this data, but we need someone to do something to turn into a project to analyse the data. The DVM students at Sydney University, there's going to be 140 of them every year. They all have to do a research project. If you're a welfare group that's got an idea for a project or some data, it's not very suited for a longitudinal study for students, but you can email the deans of the university. That would be one start, because then they'll disseminate that information. Or you can get on the university's website and look at different staff members' research interests and email them and say, we've got this idea for a project, and then have a meeting. That's how it all kind of happens.
Yeah. All right. So sorry, there's no easy way to do it.
No easy way. I mean, I've been doing this since 2008. I don't get paid. I don't have time to be, I mean, I'm trying to rehome dogs, I'm trying to help people with Shar-Pei. I actually don't have time to go chasing universities for the paper, so I guess we're back to square one.
Well, handshake board out the front. Everyone's got their business cards there. I work for a university. There's other people here who work for universities. So I know you're busy with your things, and we're busy too, but we could have a cup of tea.
Right. Fabulous. Thank you.
Yes.
Question regarding TNR and funding. Obviously, we've already talked about money, and we know that that's a struggle. Obviously, long term, we know that TNRing is a cheaper option than trapping and killing, but at present, while it's not a legally recognised option, and while it's being done in fairly isolated ways, like the Uni of New South Wales, how did they fund that? Where did that money come from to sterilise those cats?
Well, Helen's here, but I think the university executive paid for those, didn't they? Oh. Helen, talk to the expert.
We got an initial input of money, about $5,000 right at the beginning, to start the program for our first desexing. And that paid for the desexing of the first lot of cats. But since then, it's all been through donations, and a lot of it out of our own pockets. So I know it's an expensive thing to get into. We've been lucky to be able to access low-cost vets who have done desexing for reduced amounts of money. But at the moment, there's no easy funding source. So I'm sorry, no easy answers.
Figured there wouldn't be. I just thought it was worth the ask.
And we have a question over here.
I was just going to say, overseas, like Petco and PetSmart charities have put a lot of money. Like some of those, you can get up to $500,000 for grants for desexing. I'm hoping that's going to come here. I have been speaking with the Pet Foundation, which is funded by Pet Barn and Green Cross. And they're actually very supportive and open to trap, neuter and return. And so if you are interested in doing trap, neuter and return, I think you can get permits, even though it's officially illegal. You can get a permit through your state government. You have to apply, you have to tell them what they're doing, what you're going to do with the cats. But it's not impossible to do that.
Yes.
Hi, sorry. I come from a bit of a different perspective to welfare. I mean, I work part of a community vet clinic, so we deal with a lot of the public with private patients, and also we pretty much campaign for NDN, so National Desexing Network. Obviously, we do a lot of our bookings based on that, so there is a big push, obviously, for desexing. What we're going around in circles all the time with, and that's obviously various different opinions in the clinic and everything in terms of early age desexing. So in a lot of ways we want to push desexing for the community because it's the best way that we can obviously get through to them about it. We want to make it open and accessible and everything we can do. But then I think there's the big kind of barrier we're finding in that we feel an obligation at times to actually make sure we're telling private clients about, the risks involved. And that's kind of where we're stuck. Like, should we be telling clients, straight up, private clients that is, the risks involved? Or is that potentially going to create more of a barrier to people who are already sceptical or already not necessarily, too keen on desexing? Like, we're trying to get the door open, but is that going to create a barrier? Like, what's your sort of idea, and should we tell them the risks involved or the issues, or should that just be something that becomes part of general surgery sort of complications that anyone can expect?
Well, I think any surgery you need to explain there's an anaesthetic risk. That should be certain part of every time you admit a patient. That would be standard practice for sure. I mean, every surgery has a risk to it, so it's still an important part, but still absolutely necessary to do it. So I think.
Should there be more of a push on early age desexings, like the potential risks they're facing, or yeah?
Well, I think we know there's good evidence to show that there's the anaesthetic risk is the same if the proper procedures are applied to. So there's no actual real anaesthetic risk if the practice normally does that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think that shouldn't really be a problem.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I totally agree. I think that there is absolutely no research that I know of that shows that there's increased anesthetic risk between 4-month-old cat and a 6-month-old cat. And as we've seen, vets are generally supportive of this. It's just their actions don't translate into it. And I think that comes down to that risk reduction approach. The animals are a bit bigger and maybe they're not comfortable with it. But if you're comfortable with it, you know how to do it, you have experience in it, then I would just explain the risks like with any surgery.
I mean, it certainly happens. I mean, and vets have, that any anaesthetic can go wrong, even the most healthy animal. Occasionally, something happens and it dies. And I mean, when a client owns it, that's a major traumatic event, and it's stressful for the vet when someone dies. So it is an anaesthetic risk, and it's something that a client owned has to acknowledge. And so, it would be far better if they're desexed before they own them and they don't have to go through that. So, I think it fully support them being desexed before they own them.
Yeah. And anyone who's had surgery in a hospital, personal surgery, you have to sign the form that says you've got a 1 in 100,000 chance of getting this complication. Yes, I mean, surgery is always associated with some risk. What I would like to see with cats is that, with vaccinations, we don't say to a client, would you like to come back for a second vaccination? We say, you need to come back 2-3 weeks and go and see Mary or John and make an appointment on the way out. And what I would like to see is, we vaccinate. You need to go and make an appointment for your cat to be desexed in 2 weeks' time or in a week's time, and then we'll see it back in 2 weeks' time to take out its sutures. So it would be vaccinate, desex, vaccinate, and suture removal. And that we're not saying to them, would you like your cat desexed? It's part of the health, the health program that we say to people is important for them to have their cat undertake. So I think it's just a change in attitude. With dogs, it's a bit of a different issue. There, we need better data on some of the things that are coming out. There's been a lot of press given, and Alana didn't have time to go through it, but when her paper's published, there's been a lot of adverse press about desexing, and if you actually look at that material, and I had John Morton, the epidemiologist, look at it, and they didn't properly account for body condition, and we know that desexed dogs do tend to have a higher body condition, they're more likely to be overweight and obese. And all of the things that were reported in some of those papers with neoplasia being higher is also associated with obesity. And so you have to make sure that you're comparing apples for apples. But they got a lot of press about, that you shouldn't have your dog desexed at all because it's at more risk. So we do need better data.
Okay, another quick question. Kim?
Just to confirm what Professor Jackie's saying, I started early desexing for the Cat Protection Society in 1990 and since 94 with my own practice. Standard for client cats is 4 months, just because it's the day in hospital stressful, and I found more problems with diarrhea. But I used to do kittens as small as 700 grams, and as long as it then became an issue with a social problem. But I have had a 0 death rate with the pediatric surgery. In fact, I rather resent seeing, fat cats and, older cats. 6 months old is like, oh, this is just awful. But the other thing is, if you want to talk to me about looking at my longitudinal data, I have the data on about 2,000 early, prepubescent sexing and seeing whether or not there's any long-term effect. And there isn't, but you can look at my data if you want to.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to take that as a comment, sorry, because we've got 2 more people that want to ask questions. So next question, please.
Hi, I do animal management, and we have compulsory desexing for cats and dogs where we work. And in the last probably 2 years, I found an increase veterinary exemptions from vets regarding large breed dogs. It was kind of touched on about hip dysplasia and stuff like that, and spoke about behaviour. I guess my guys are all found cross, and I even asked my own vet, is there really big issues? And I just wanted to get a feedback, because we're getting lots and lots of vets writing in, and they're not wanting to desex any of our large breed dogs, and we don't probably live in a very responsible sorry, I didn't mean to, responsible owners for like at least 18 months to nearly 2 years old. And we, in Victoria, it's from 3 months old registration.
I can say from personal experience, I'm working in GP on the coast, and that is a trend. It is happening. But if you look at the literature, desexing between early age or traditional age, they're the same, but waiting for over a year does make a little bit of a difference, but there needs to be further studies on it. But if you're going to wait to traditional age, it's no different. I don't know if anyone else has more opinion on that, but...
Because that's what's been told, is that, like they're saying that there's supposedly more research from maybe the states and stuff in regards to the large breeds.
Yeah.
And we just haven't had that data given to us, because we followed the guidelines of the RSPCA and stuff. That's why Frankston implemented early age, compulsory desexing.
Yeah, I guess if you, sorry.
Yeah, so there's certainly gaining evidence to show that, some cancers are more prevalent in desexed, especially large breed dogs. The paper that I had has got some references to some of those studies. It's just an emerging trend, and I suppose that vets are saying, well, the client has to decide whether or not he's prepared to take those risks with their dog, whether they're more likely to be obese or we're more likely to get bone cancer. That has to be a decision that the client has to come up with and decide themselves.
And those papers that they came out of Davis, they're the ones that didn't account well enough for differences in body condition between the two groups. The bottom line is, I think, we don't have enough data to unequivocally say there is no adverse effects of one desexing and desexing at an earlier age for dogs, but we know that desexing reduces a number of things. We know it prevents pyometra, which can be deadly. We know that it, if they're desexed before this first cycle, for mammary carcinoma. So there's a whole lot of things we know, and they're much less likely to roam and get pregnant. So, there may be some groups that some breeds, but I think the problem with a lot of veterinary data, because we're not funded by big companies or get big NIH grants and things like that. The studies are small. So with that hip dysplasia one, they didn't have a lot of dogs, but they showed that the ones that got the early age desexing were less likely to be euthanized from hip dysplasia, although the actual diagnosis was more frequent in the dogs that were desexed after 5 months of age. And then other studies didn't show any association. So that's the problem. You need very large studies that are well conducted, and they cost money.